August 7, 1942. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. The pre-dawn air hangs heavy with aviation fuel and tropical humidity as Commander Saburo Yamada walks the flight line, his boots crunching on volcanic gravel, still warm from yesterday's sun. Around him, ground crews swarm over twin-engine bombers, Mitsubishi G-4M Betty aircraft, performing the pre-flight rituals that have become sacred routine. The smell of hot metal and hydraulic fluid mingles with the sweet rot of jungle vegetation pressing against the airfield's perimeter. Yamada pauses beside the nose of his lead bomber, running his hand along the aluminum skin, feeling the rivets beneath his palm. This aircraft represents the cutting edge of Japanese naval aviation. Long-range, fast, capable of striking targets 800 miles distant and returning home. It is a weapon of empire, designed to project power across the vast distances of the Pacific to carry the emperor's will to distant islands and enemy fleets. In the cramped cockpit, navigational charts are marked with today's target. American positions on Guadalcanal, where Marines have had the audacity to establish a foothold on what was, until last month, uncontested Japanese territory. Yamada has flown this route a dozen times. He knows the timing, the approach angles, the escape vectors. What he does not know, what he cannot yet imagine, is that within minutes of reaching the target area, he will encounter an American aircraft so far beyond Japanese technological expectations that it will fundamentally alter the calculus of the Pacific Air War. An aircraft so advanced that within 2 years the Americans will discard it as obsolete, replacing it with something even better. This morning will be the beginning of a revelation that will haunt Japanese aviation engineers for the remainder of the war. That America does not merely build superior aircraft, but builds them in such quantities and with such rapidity that yesterday's miracle becomes today's surplus. The Betty bomber is an elegant machine, a testament to Japanese aeronautical engineering's emphasis on range and speed over all else. Its design philosophy is ruthlessly focused. Fly farther and faster than any comparable bomber, reach targets the enemy believes are safe, strike with precision, and return home before interception is possible. To achieve this, Japanese engineers have made calculated sacrifices. Armor protection is minimal, extra weight that reduces range. Self-sealing fuel tanks are absent, another weight penalty deemed unacceptable. Defensive armament is light, just enough to discourage pursuit, but not enough to add significant drag. The result is an aircraft that can reach targets 1,300 miles from its base, faster than most Allied fighters of 1941, carrying a meaningful bomb load. It is the perfect weapon for an offensive war across oceanic distances, for a navy that plans to strike first, strike hard, and win before the enemy can respond. In the opening months of the Pacific War, the Betty validates every design decision. Operating from bases scattered across the newly conquered territories, Betty formations range across thousands of miles, striking Allied positions with near impunity. They sink the British battleship Prince of Wales and battle cruiser Repulse off Malaya in December 1941, the first time in history that capital ships underway at sea are destroyed by air attack alone. They pound Henderson Field on Guadalcanal night after night, disrupting American operations, destroying aircraft on the ground, forcing Marines to scramble for cover. The crews who fly them are among the most experienced and skilled in the world, veterans of the China campaign, trained to standards that demand perfection. They fly in tight formations, navigate by dead reckoning across featureless ocean, and deliver their bombs with accuracy that Allied intelligence finds difficult to credit. But there are whispers, even in these early days of triumph, that something is wrong with the larger strategic picture. Experienced pilots returning from strikes report encountering a new American fighter over Guadalcanal, a twin-engine, twin-boom design unlike anything in the pre-war intelligence files. The reports are fragmentary, colored by the chaos of combat, but certain details recur with troubling consistency. This new fighter is fast, possibly faster than the Betty at altitude. It climbs aggressively. It carries heavy armament, multiple cannon or heavy machine guns concentrated in the nose. And most disturbing of all, it appears in numbers that suggest substantial production. not a prototype or limited deployment. Commander Yamada encounters this aircraft for the first time on the morning of August 7th, approaching Guadalcanal from the northwest at 18,000 feet. The bomber formation is 27 aircraft strong, stacked in 3 precise V formations, flying with the discipline that Japanese naval aviation prides itself on. The weather is clear, visibility unlimited, good conditions for accurate bombing. The morning sun is behind them, the classic attacking position. Everything is proceeding according to doctrine. And then the sky erupts with tracer fire. The American fighters come from above and ahead, diving out of the sun in the opposite of the expected attack profile. Most interceptors attack from behind, chasing bombers they're trying to escape. These fighters are attacking head-on, closing at combined speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour, firing from ranges that seem recklessly long. Yamada has perhaps 3 seconds to register the distinctive twin-boom silhouette before his aircraft is bracketed by cannon fire. The sound is unlike machine gun strikes. Deeper, more visceral, the impact of 20 millimeters and 37 millimeters rounds punching through aluminum that was never designed to stop them. The Betty to his right simply disintegrates, one wing folding upward as fire engulfs the fuselage. The aircraft to his left trails smoke and begins a shallow dive that will end in the ocean far below. Yamada's own aircraft shudders under multiple hits. The co-pilot slumps forward, the instrument panel shatters, and smoke begins pouring from the port engine. In the span of perhaps 15 seconds, the formation has gone from disciplined offensive weapon to shattered remnants fighting for survival. The American fighter, Yamada will later learn it is designated the P-38 Lightning, screams past and begins a climbing turn that should be impossible for an aircraft of its size. Twin-engine fighters are supposed to be sluggish, trading maneuverability for range or firepower. This aircraft climbs like a single-engine fighter, turns like a fighter, fights like a fighter, but carries the fuel and ammunition load of a much larger aircraft. It is a contradiction, an impossibility made real. Yamada nurses his damaged bomber back toward Rabaul, alone now, the formation scattered across 100 miles of ocean, and begins to understand that the rules of the air war have changed. The Betty's advantages, range, speed, striking power, have been rendered moot by an aircraft that is faster, more heavily armed, and apparently available in whatever quantities the Americans require. The P-38 Lightning is, in 1942, the most advanced fighter aircraft in operational service anywhere in the world. Its design, originating from a 1937 Army Air Corps requirement for a high-altitude interceptor, embodies a fundamentally different engineering philosophy than Japanese aircraft. Where Japanese designers optimize for range and offensive capability while accepting vulnerability, American designers pursue performance through brute force. Twin supercharged engines generating 2,600 horsepower combined, turbochargers that maintain power at altitude, concentrated nose armament that delivers devastating firepower without the convergence problems of wing-mounted guns. The aircraft is not light. It is not simple. It is not cheap. But it is phenomenally capable, able to fight at altitudes where Japanese fighters struggle, fast enough to catch anything in the Pacific theater, and tough enough to absorb damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. Japanese intelligence officers, collecting reports from surviving bomber crews, begin assembling a technical profile of this new threat. The speed estimates cluster around 400 miles per hour, significantly faster than the Zero fighter, let alone the Betty bomber. The service ceiling appears to exceed 40,000 feet. The armament is consistently reported as devastating. 137mm cannon and 4.50 caliber machine guns, all nose-mounted, allowing the pilot to aim the entire aircraft at the target without worrying about convergence distances. The range is difficult to assess, but the Lightning appears over targets far from known American bases, suggesting endurance comparable to Japanese fighters specifically designed for long-range operations. Every technical specification is troubling. Taken together, they describe an aircraft that should not exist, that represents a level of performance Japanese engineers have not achieved and, given current resource constraints, may not be able to achieve. But the truly devastating realization comes not from the Lightning's capabilities, but from the emerging understanding of American production capacity. In the last months of 1942 and throughout 1943, the number of P-38 encounters increases steadily. They appear in New Guinea, in the Solomons, over Rabaul itself. Japanese intelligence estimates American Lightning production at perhaps a few hundred aircraft, a reasonable number for an advanced fighter incorporating so much complex technology. The actual number, discovered through captured documents and post-war records, is closer to 10,000 P-38s produced during the war years. 10,000 of an aircraft that represents, in 1942, the pinnacle of fighter design. The psychological impact of this number on Japanese planners cannot be overstated. Japan will produce approximately 10,000 Zero fighters during the entire war, and the Zero is a comparatively simple aircraft built to looser tolerances, requiring less sophisticated manufacturing. America is producing equivalent numbers of a twin-engine, turbocharged, high-performance fighter while simultaneously producing even larger numbers of other aircraft types. The symbolic weight of the P-38 in the experience of Japanese aviation becomes the sound, the distinctive asymmetric whistle of its counter-rotating propellers, creating a unique acoustic signature that becomes instantly recognizable to anyone who has heard it once. Japanese soldiers in forward positions learn to identify the Lightning by sound alone, often before visual contact. The whistle becomes a herald of destruction, a warning that American fighters are overhead and that any aircraft caught in the open, bomber, transport, reconnaissance plane, is likely doomed. Ground crews develop a superstitious dread of the sound, diving for cover at the first hint of that distinctive note. It is not the loudest aircraft, not the most aggressive sounding, but it is utterly distinctive, and its presence means that the local airspace belongs to America. By mid-1943, the Betty bomber is being withdrawn from daylight operations over contested airspace. The losses are simply unsustainable. Aircraft that cost months to build and crews that take years to train are being shot down faster than they can be replaced. The Betty's design advantages, range and speed, have been overtaken by American technological progress. The P-38 is faster. The P-38 has comparable range when equipped with drop tanks. The P-38 can operate at altitudes the Betty cannot effectively reach. And perhaps most critically, the P-38 is being produced in numbers that allow the Americans to maintain standing patrols over potential targets, waiting for Japanese aircraft to arrive rather than scrambling to intercept them. The initiative has shifted decisively. Japanese bombers are forced to operate at night, or at dawn and dusk, or with massive fighter escorts that consume fuel and resources for marginal gains. Japanese engineers, studying captured P-38 components and photographic intelligence, begin to understand the depth of American technological sophistication. The turbochargers alone represent a manufacturing capability Japan cannot match. Complex, high-tolerance components that must operate at extreme temperatures and pressures without failing. The counter-rotating propellers eliminate torque effects that trouble single propeller designs, but require precision manufacturing and specialized reduction gears. The tricycle landing gear simplifies takeoffs and landings, but demands stronger structures and more sophisticated hydraulics. Every system in the aircraft reflects a design philosophy that accepts complexity and cost in exchange for performance, and a manufacturing base capable of producing complex, high-tolerance components in vast quantities. But the revelation that truly stuns Japanese aviation planners comes in late 1944, when intelligence reports begin describing a new American fighter appearing in the Pacific theater. The P-51 Mustang, originally designed for Britain, has been mated with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and transformed into arguably the finest piston engine fighter of the war. It is faster than the P-38, longer range than the P-38, cheaper to produce than the P-38, and in many combat situations, more effective than the P-38. The Americans, having developed the Lightning to the peak of twin-engine fighter performance, are now deploying its replacement, a single-engine design that outperforms it in most metrics while being simpler and less expensive to manufacture. The P-38 is not withdrawn from service because it is inadequate. It continues to perform yeoman work in the Pacific, particularly in long-range escort and ground attack roles where its twin-engine reliability and heavy payload are valuable. But the mere fact that America has moved on to something better, that the Lightning is being gradually replaced in premier fighter units, sends a devastating message to Japanese observers. American technological progress is so rapid that aircraft which would be treasures in the Japanese inventory are merely adequate in the American inventory. The cycle time from design to deployment to obsolescence is measured in years for America, while Japanese aircraft designs remain in frontline service for the entire war because there are no resources to develop and produce replacements. A captured Japanese aviation engineer, interrogated on Saipan in the summer of 1944, provides remarkable insight into this psychological dynamic. He has spent the war working on bomber development projects, trying to design a successor to the Betty that addresses its vulnerabilities without sacrificing its range. The work has been frustrating, hampered by material shortages, by the loss of experienced engineers to military service, by the growing disruption of strategic bombing. He has shown photographs of American aircraft production facilities, vast factories where Lightnings, Mustangs, and bombers are assembled on moving lines, surrounded by acres of parts storage, served by rail lines that bring raw materials and carry away finished aircraft. He studies the photographs for a long time, then asks a question through the interpreter. Where do they train so many workers? The American interrogator explains that many of the workers are women, recruited from civilian life, trained in weeks or months to perform specific assembly tasks. The Japanese engineer shakes his head slowly. In Japan, aircraft assembly is performed by experienced craftsmen, men who have apprenticed in the trade, who understand the entire aircraft and can troubleshoot problems. The idea of training someone in weeks to build components of a fighter aircraft seems absurd, a recipe for disaster. And yet, the evidence suggests it works. The American aircraft are not falling apart. They are not failing in combat due to manufacturing defects. They are, if anything, more reliable than their Japanese counterparts. The engineer's worldview, built on assumptions about the necessity of craftsmanship and expertise, collides with American reality. That properly designed processes and quality control systems can allow relatively unskilled workers to produce highly complex machines in enormous quantities. By 1945, the Pacific Air War has become a grotesque mismatch. Japanese aircraft production has collapsed under the weight of strategic bombing, raw material shortages, and the systematic destruction of the industrial base. The aircraft that do reach operational units are increasingly obsolete, flown by pilots with minimal training, sent on missions that are barely disguised suicide attacks. The Betty bomber, once the pride of Japanese naval aviation, has been relegated to kamikaze missions, stripped of unnecessary equipment, loaded with explosives, crewed by men who have been taught to take off but not to land. The Lightning, by contrast, has evolved through multiple variants, each improving on the last, and is being joined by waves of newer aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolts, F-6F Hellcats, the aforementioned P-51 Mustangs, each representing another iteration of American design and production capability. The symbolic transformation is complete. The Betty, designed as a long-range offensive weapon to project Japanese power across oceanic distances, has become a defensive weapon of desperation. The Lightning, designed as a defensive interceptor to protect American territory, has become an offensive weapon of annihilation, ranging across the Pacific at will, destroying Japanese aircraft in the air and on the ground, escorting bombers to targets deep in Japanese-controlled territory. The aircraft embody the strategic reversal of the entire war. Japan, having started with the initiative and clear tactical advantages, has been systematically outdesigned, outproduced, and outfought by an industrial power operating on a scale that Japanese planners never truly understood. In the final months of the war, as B-29 superfortresses burn Japanese cities with incendiary raids that kill hundreds of thousands, Japanese engineers reflect on the trajectory that led to this catastrophe. The decision-making that produced the Betty, the choice to prioritize range and speed over survivability, made perfect sense in 1939 when Japan was planning a short, victorious war against enemies assumed to be inferior. The fundamental error was not the aircraft design, but the strategic assumption underlying it, that initial tactical advantages would lead to negotiated peace before American industrial capacity could be mobilized. The Lightning and the production system that built it in such numbers proved that assumption catastrophically wrong. Post-war analyses reveal the full scope of American aviation production during World War II, approximately 300,000 military aircraft of all types, including nearly 100,000 fighters. Japanese production during the same period totals approximately 76,000 aircraft. The disparity is not merely numerical but qualitative. American aircraft become more sophisticated and capable as the war progresses. Japanese aircraft, constrained by shortages and disruption, often become simpler and less capable. The P-38 Lightning enters service in 1941 and is being phased out by 1945, replaced by more advanced designs. The Betty enters service in 1941 and is still flying suicide missions in 1945 because there is no replacement available. One nation treats aircraft as consumable resources in a continuous process of innovation and improvement. The other nation treats aircraft as precious assets to be preserved and used until destruction. One approach is sustainable in long wars. The other is not. The most bitter irony, recognized by Japanese aviation engineers after the surrender, is that the Lightning itself, the aircraft that symbolized American technological supremacy and industrial might, was discarded by the Americans almost casually. The post-war USAF had no interest in maintaining twin-engine piston fighters when jets were the obvious future. P-38s were scrapped by the thousands, sold for pennies on the dollar, pushed into the ocean, abandoned at remote airfields. Aircraft that would have been priceless to the Japanese Air Force in 1944 were treated as scrap metal in 1946. This casual disposal, more than any battle or technical specification, illustrated the gulf between American and Japanese industrial capacity. America could afford to build 10,000 of an advanced aircraft, use it for 3 years, and then throw it away because something better was available. Japan built aircraft to last because replacement was difficult or impossible. There's a photograph, taken sometime in 1946 at a Pacific airfield being decommissioned, that captures this dynamic perfectly. In the foreground, a row of P-38 Lightnings sits parked, engines removed, canopies open to the elements, slowly corroding in the tropical climate. They have been judged surplus to requirements, not worth the cost of shipping back to the United States. In the background, barely visible, Japanese prisoners of war are dismantling other American equipment under supervision. One of them, a former aircraft mechanic, stands for a moment looking at the Lightnings. Aircraft at his side would have given anything to possess in equivalent numbers, now abandoned as worthless. The photograph is not staged, just a random administrative shot documenting the base closure, but becomes iconic in Japanese post-war aviation literature. It represents the moment of complete understanding, the final proof that the war was lost not in any particular battle, but in the fundamental economic and industrial structure of the two nations. Japanese engineers recruited to work on post-war reconstruction projects often find themselves studying American manufacturing techniques, trying to understand how such production volumes were achieved. They visit American factories, read American technical literature, interview American engineers. What they discover is a system that is fundamentally different from Japanese industrial practice. American manufacturing emphasizes standardization, interchangeability, division of labor, and continuous process improvement. Workers are trained to perform specific tasks efficiently rather than understanding entire systems. Quality control is systematized rather than relying on craftsman intuition. Supply chains are optimized for volume and reliability rather than minimizing inventory. The entire system is designed to scale, to grow, to produce more with the resources available. It is not inherently superior to Japanese craftsmanship at the individual level. A skilled Japanese machinist may produce a better individual part than an American worker using standardized processes. But at scale, across millions of parts and thousands of aircraft, the American system produces better aggregate results. This lesson, learned at devastating cost during the war, becomes foundational to Japan's post-war economic miracle. Japanese industry, rebuilt from the ruins of 1945, adopts American mass production techniques while adding Japanese innovations in quality control and continuous improvement. The result, by the 1970s, is an industrial base that rivals American production in many sectors. But the engineers who make this transformation possible are, many of them, men who learned their craft maintaining Betty bombers and watching lightnings whistle overhead, men who understand viscerally that industrial capacity is strategic capacity, that the ability to produce adequately in vast quantities defeats the ability to produce perfection in limited quantities. The P-38 Lightning, in this narrative, is more than an aircraft. It is a lesson in steel and fire, a demonstration of what industrial democracy can achieve when fully mobilized. It represents a vision of warfare where material abundance replaces the need for fanatical devotion, where soldiers are supported rather than expended, where equipment is replaced rather than repaired until failure. The Japanese engineers' stunned realization that America discarded the Lightning not because it failed, but because something better was available, is the realization that the war was never winnable, that the fundamental premises of Japanese strategy were flawed from the beginning. The morning Commander Yamada flew into the teeth of P-38 interceptors over Guadalcanal. He was experiencing the leading edge of a transformation in warfare that would define the 20th century. The age of the warrior, of individual skill and sacrifice compensating for material disadvantage, was ending. The age of the industrial state, of systemic capability and institutional capacity, had begun. The Lightning's distinctive whistle, that asymmetric sound created by counter-rotating propellers on an over-engineered, overpowered, overproduced fighter, was the sound of the future arriving. It was the sound of a nation that could afford to build the best and then build something better, that could waste resources in pursuit of marginal advantages, because waste itself was a form of abundance. It was the sound of total war waged by a society that valued individual life enough to surround its soldiers with overwhelming material support and was wealthy enough to afford that support. The Betty bomber, elegant and fragile, represented a different philosophy, one that asked men to sacrifice because machines were precious. The Lightning represented the opposite. Machines are expendable. Men are valuable, and a society that can produce machines faster than it loses men will prevail. Both philosophies have their dignity, but in total war, only one is sustainable. The discarded Lightning, rusting at a forgotten airfield, its mission complete and its service no longer required, teaches the final lesson, that abundance, not austerity, is the ultimate strategic weapon. That freedom to replace and improve and discard is a luxury only the victor can afford. And that the sound of American aircraft, whistling through Pacific skies in numbers that darken the sun, was not merely the sound of engines and propellers, but the sound of a different kind of civilization announcing its dominance. A civilization that could afford to be wasteful because it was wealthy, to be casual about excellence because excellence was commonplace, to discard today's masterpiece because tomorrow's would be better. The Japanese engineers were stunned, not because the Lightning was good, but because America treated something so good as disposable. That stunning, more than any defeat in battle, revealed the true nature of the enemy they had challenged. And in that revelation lay both the explanation for Japan's defeat and the blueprint for its resurrection.